Hello guys, this is new Reddit story.
In the dimly lit corner of his office, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Bob Harris sat in front of his computer screen, his fingers hesitating above the keys. The soft hum of the fan in the corner seemed to echo in the silence as he read the article before him, a piece he had written for the Department of Defense's website years ago, honoring a fallen soldier. The words felt distant now, as if they belonged to someone else. The article was simple, a tribute to Corporal James Cole, a veteran who had served with distinction during Operation Desert Storm. Cole had been a quiet, dependable soldier who had sacrificed much, and Bob had written the piece to ensure his story would never be forgotten. But now, as he stared at the screen, something felt wrong. A notification popped up. This article has been removed due to recent policy changes. Bob rubbed his temples, the weight of the past year pressing on him. Ever since the President's executive order against diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) policies had been implemented, things had begun to change. It started subtly, with small shifts in the way the government communicated about veterans, their histories, and the programs that supported them. But now, it was becoming harder to ignore. The article about Cole's service wasn't the only one affected. Across the Department of Defense website, countless stories about veterans, particularly those who were minorities or who had been involved in DI-related initiatives, were being quietly erased or rewritten. The changes were being framed as part of a streamlining effort, but Bob couldn't help but feel that something deeper was at play. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. As a career military officer, Bob had always believed in the principles of service, honor, and duty. He had never been someone to challenge the chain of command, but this felt different. These weren't just statistics or impersonal policies. These were real people. People who had given everything for their country. People like Corporal Cole. 3 days later, Bob found himself at a meeting in the Pentagon, a space that had become increasingly sterile and devoid of the camaraderie he had once cherished. The room was filled with senior officers, each wearing an expression of resignation. General Carver, a man who had always been known for his calm demeanor, addressed the room. "We are here to discuss the implications of the recent executive order. The order mandates that we remove all content related to DI initiatives and veteran stories that highlight certain aspects of military diversity." Bob's stomach tightened. "General, are you saying we are erasing the histories of these veterans?" Carver nodded, his face grave. "That's the directive, Colonel. It's part of a broader effort to revert military culture to its traditional values. The idea is to focus on the service itself, not the diversity of the individuals who serve." Bob's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles turning white. He wanted to speak up, but he knew that the room was filled with men and women who would follow orders no matter what. He had seen it too many times. He had respected that tradition for most of his life. But this was different. This wasn't just about the military's history. This was about people's lives, their sacrifices, their identities. "Sir," Bob finally said, his voice steady but laced with anger, "what happens to the veterans whose stories have already been shared? What happens to those who served honorably, but whose experiences might fall under the umbrella of DI policies?" There was a long pause in the room. General Carver's eyes darkened, and he glanced around the table. "That's the problem, Colonel. We don't know. The order is clear. All such content is to be removed. And those veterans, well, they'll be forgotten." Bob could feel his blood boiling. "How is that right, sir? These veterans deserve to be remembered, not erased. If we're erasing their stories, we're erasing their legacies." Carver didn't respond immediately. He glanced down at the stack of papers in front of him, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up. "Sometimes, Colonel, the government makes decisions that are in the best interest of the country. This is one of those times. We can't change what's happening, but you need to understand, this is bigger than just our department." That night, Bob sat in his office, staring at his computer screen once more. The government had already removed Cole's article, along with countless others. He had written countless pieces about soldiers' bravery and sacrifices, each one carefully crafted to honor their memory. But now, those memories were being wiped away like chalk on a blackboard. He opened the file containing Cole's tribute again. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He could write another version. A sanitized version, perhaps. A version that didn't mention Cole's family background, his involvement in programs that promoted diversity in the military, or his connection to the wider fight for social justice that had taken place during the Gulf War. Or he could defy the orders. He could refuse to write for an institution that was willing to forget the very people who made it what it was. He could leak the stories to the press, or go public, and risk everything for the sake of truth. But what would that cost him? His career? His family's safety? Bob sat back in his chair, looking at the file one more time. He could see Cole's face in his mind's eye, serious, but kind. A man who had given so much for his country. A man whose legacy was now at risk of being erased. But it wasn't just Cole. It was the countless other veterans who had served with honor, whose stories would be lost to time. The decision weighed on him like a leaden weight. But in that moment, Bob made up his mind. He would not let them forget. He would not allow them to erase the stories of the men and women who had fought for this country, no matter what it cost him. If the government wanted to wipe their histories clean, he would fight for them in the only way he knew how, by telling their stories, even if he had to do it in secret. And so, with trembling hands, Bob began to type. Bob spent the next few days in a haze of conflicted emotions. Each moment felt like a battle between duty and conscience. He had served his country faithfully for decades, following orders without question. He had dedicated his life to the military, to the camaraderie, to the honor that came with being a soldier. But now, the very institution he had sworn to protect was betraying the values it had once cherished. The president's executive order had been a devastating blow to the military community, but for Bob, it was personal. It wasn't just about politics or policy. It was about the veterans he had known, the ones who had served with honor, who had made sacrifices that most people would never understand. These were not just statistics or names on a page. They were real people with real stories. As the days passed, the pressure from his superiors only grew. The Department of Defense had issued strict guidelines to remove any content that was tied to DI policies, diversity initiatives, or anything that wasn't in line with the new narrative. It was a purge, a cleansing of the history that didn't fit into the new vision for the military. But Bob couldn't let it go. He couldn't sit idly by while the memories of the men and women who had served were erased. In secret, Bob began to gather what he could: articles, interviews, old photos, and letters from the veterans he had worked with over the years. They had all shared their stories with him in confidence, trusting that he would preserve their legacies. Now, he had to protect those stories at all costs. That night, Bob sat alone in his office, the soft glow of his computer screen illuminating his face. His fingers flew over the keys as he began typing. He wrote about Corporal Cole again, the man whose article had been removed, and about the others whose stories were slipping into the void. He wrote about the families they left behind, the battles they fought, and the causes they believed in. But he couldn't stop there. He knew that if he kept everything within the confines of the Department of Defense's website, the stories would be buried, hidden in the labyrinth of government bureaucracy. So, Bob made a decision. He would publish the stories himself. He had connections. He knew reporters who were sympathetic to the cause. He knew outlets that would take the stories and run with them. He could get the truth out, even if it meant going rogue. Bob was no stranger to risk, and this felt like a battle he couldn't afford to lose. That's when he received the call. It was late, well past midnight, when the phone rang. Bob's heart skipped a beat as he answered, unsure of who would be calling at such an hour. Colonel Harris? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, cold, and distant. I'm glad you're still awake. Who is this? Bob's pulse quickened. There was something in the man's tone that made him uneasy. You don't know me, the voice continued, but I know you. I know what you're doing. I know you've been gathering the stories of those veterans. Bob's stomach twisted into a knot. How did this person know? What do you want? Bob asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to help you, the voice said. But you need to understand that the people you're up against are far more powerful than you realize. If you continue down this path, you'll be putting yourself and everyone you care about in danger. You're not just fighting the government. You're fighting a system that's been in place for decades. Bob's breath caught in his throat. Who are you? The voice paused for a moment, as if contemplating something. Then it spoke again, quieter this time. I'm someone who can make sure the stories you're trying to protect don't disappear. But you'll have to trust me. You'll have to play the game, and you'll have to stay hidden. If you don't, you'll be erased too. A chill ran down Bob's spine. He had always believed in the strength of the military, in the power of doing what was right. But now, He was being told that even the truth could be manipulated, controlled. Was there anyone left who would fight for the real stories? Bob's mind raced. He had never been one to trust easily, but something about the voice on the other end felt genuine. He knew the stakes were high, higher than they had ever been before. If he didn't act now, everything he had fought for would be lost. "Okay," Bob said, his voice firm with resolve. "I'll trust you, but you need to tell me who you are and what to do." The voice on the other end chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "It's not about who I am. It's about what you're willing to do. Keep writing. Keep telling the truth. And don't let them silence you." The line went dead. The next few days were a blur of frantic work and constant vigilance. Bob sent out emails, made phone calls, and gathered the stories that had been hidden for so long. He didn't know who the mysterious caller was, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't stop now. He began publishing the articles, one by one, on a personal blog he had created. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The stories began to circulate, slowly at first, but then they started gaining traction. More veterans reached out to share their experiences. More families came forward, eager to see their loved ones' stories told. It felt like a revolution was brewing, and Bob was at the heart of it. But it wasn't just about the stories anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about ensuring that the truth could never be erased. That no matter how powerful the forces were that tried to suppress it, the voices of the veterans would never be silenced. Bob had made his choice. He would fight. He would fight for them, even if it meant standing alone. And in the quiet of the night, as the stories continued to pour out into the world, Bob knew one thing for sure. The forgotten voices would never be forgotten again. Days turned into weeks, and Bob's blog continued to grow in popularity. Stories that had once been hidden, swept under the rug, now shone like beacons in the dark. Veterans from all walks of life reached out to Bob, sharing their experiences, some joyous, some tragic, but all meaningful. Every piece was a tribute to those whose names had been forgotten by the very system that had once promised to honor them. Bob's work had become something of a movement. News outlets, small and independent, began picking up the stories. Whispers of Bob Harris, the rogue military officer fighting to preserve the truth, spread through the media like wildfire. People were listening. People were learning. But the government had also noticed. The powers that be, those who were behind the erasure of these histories, were growing concerned. The articles and stories Bob had published didn't just challenge the executive order. They exposed its flaws, its disregard for the real human cost of the military's actions. These stories couldn't be ignored. Bob began receiving threats. They started small, strange phone calls in the middle of the night, anonymous messages telling him to stop, to take down the blog, to let things be. He ignored them, but then the threats escalated. One night, as Bob sat alone in his office, his phone buzzed. He picked it up to see an encrypted message that read, "You're playing a dangerous game, Colonel. You don't understand the forces at work here. Stop, or you'll regret it." His heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. He had made his choice. He wasn't going to back down. But that wasn't the end. The next day, Bob's world began to unravel. Bob arrived at his office early, as he always did, only to find the doors locked. He stared at the building for a moment, confused. It was rare for the office to be closed without prior notice. When he tried his key, it didn't work. He called his supervisor, but there was no answer. When he called security, they claimed they hadn't seen him in days, as if he had vanished from their records entirely. A feeling of dread crept over Bob. He made his way home, only to find that the same strange erasure had happened there. His front door was locked and appeared undisturbed, but when he entered, nothing was where it was supposed to be. His furniture was gone, replaced with empty space. His files, his research, the evidence he had painstakingly gathered, everything was missing. It was as though he had never lived there at all. Bob's phone rang again. This time, he answered it quickly, a cold knot forming in his chest. "Colonel Harris, I'm afraid you've made a grave mistake," a familiar voice said. It was the same voice that had called him weeks ago, the one that had warned him to play it safe. "You've gone too far, and now they're coming for you." "Who are you?" Bob demanded, his voice shaking. "What's happening to me? Why is everything disappearing?" The voice on the other end of the line sighed. "You've uncovered something you were never supposed to know. The truth about the history of the military and about the people who control it. They've been erasing parts of history for years, shaping the narrative to fit their agenda. But now that you're pushing back, they've decided to make sure you're forgotten too. I won't stop, Bob said, his voice unwavering. You're not going to erase me. You're not going to erase their stories. You already are erased, Bob, the voice said coldly. You just haven't realized it yet. Bob's life became a blur of confusion and frustration. He tried to reach out to his family, but their numbers were disconnected. He tried to find someone, anyone, who could confirm that he was real, that he hadn't simply fallen into some nightmare. But everywhere he went, there was nothing, no trace of his past. In the midst of this chaos, one final message arrived on his phone, an encrypted file. Bob opened it cautiously, praying that it wasn't another threat. The file was a document, but as he opened it, his heart sank. It was a government memo, detailing the actions taken to erase his existence from the records. There were no traces of Bob Harris anywhere in the military system. His service record had been scrubbed clean, his name removed from every list, and the articles he had written, the stories of the veterans, were all gone. The memo ended with one simple line. Harris is to be forgotten. No one is to speak of him again. Bob sat back in his chair, numb. The world around him seemed to crumble, slipping through his fingers. No one would remember him. No one would remember the stories he had fought so hard to preserve. But then something unexpected happened. As Bob stared at the empty screen in front of him, the phone rang once more. It was an unknown number, but he answered it without hesitation. Bob, a familiar voice said. It's me. We've been watching you. We know what you've done. Bob's pulse quickened as he recognized the voice. It was the same one that had warned him, the one who had called him in the dead of night. You're not alone, the voice continued. We're here to help you. There's a group, veterans, allies, people who believe in the truth. We'll fight this together. The stories you've shared, no matter what they do, they will live on. You will live on. And just like that, Bob felt the weight on his chest lighten. He wasn't completely alone. There were others. There was hope. Though his personal history had been erased, his legacy, the stories of the men and women he had fought for, would continue. The truth couldn't be silenced, not forever. As the fog of confusion began to lift, Bob realized one undeniable truth. The voices of the forgotten would never be silenced as long as there were people willing to fight for them. And for the first time in what felt like ages, Bob allowed himself a small, hopeful smile.